Here, I'm Deborah. Thank you, Sue. I will be doing this presentation today, but before I get into it, I want to give Walter, who is here to represent Mafi, who is sponsoring this program for us today. I want to give him a chance to say hello and introduce himself and his product. And Walter, if you like, I will bring up that video.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it'll work, great.
Yeah, I think so. And then we'll kind of dig into it. So I think we can get started. So you guys are all here to hear me talk about what we're considering to be 8 different key metrics that we look at when we design mainly living spaces, but I think that these things can apply to all types of architecture. That are very specifically focused on including health and sustainability within the design. So with that, let's see, moving forward. Okay, so really huge thanks to Mafi. They've agreed to sponsor this program. It's amazing. That's an amazing product. I'm going to let Walter take it over here and explain a little bit who they are. Oh, you're muted, Walter.
Got it. Yeah, I was trying to find the button. No, this is a perfect segue. I'm traveling today. A flight was delayed. Coming back from the International Living Future Institute conference down in Atlanta, where we were diving really deep into this subject. And you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I wanted to put you up front and center.
All right. And we had just 3 full days. It's still going now. 3 full days on how we can all get together and first establish what the work is that we need to get done. I like to say it's like we've all designed the bicycle on how to build sustainably, and we're starting to really incorporate human health into the factors here. But now we kind of have a pedal, and we can start pushing. We can all start pushing together. Interestingly, AIA, biomimicry, ILFI, of course, and a bunch of building assessors were all together trying to figure out how to do it combined, instead of like there's 150 different certifications about how to make this happen, but why aren't we all just working together? So that conference was super inspiring, and it's got me all fired up. But how that relates to us is that we create the only wood flooring that's specifically designed for human health. It's not just flooring, it's walls and ceilings. We use native to a Europe species because we produce everything in Austria using a family-owned, actually woman majority-owned company. And we produce everything in 4 days and get it delivered anywhere in the world. How it works is it's just essentially bare bones materials are wood, and we just build it in 3 layers in alternating directions using the same glue we used to eat in kindergarten class. So really super safe. And then we just offer it with just a simple oil on the top and teach you how to wash it with soap and water. One of the important things to remember is that you will avoid the terms and conditions of Mafi floors if you don't wash it with a ton of soap and water. I just let that sit for a second, because if you ever go to a place to buy a wood floor, the first thing they tell you is do not get it wet. But the tree itself that we get all wood floors from it's healthiest when it's completely saturated with water. So with that, you can find it online. There's Deborah's got some links, and I live in Silver Spring, Maryland. Happy to answer any questions, and I'm going to monitor the chat and get off before it gets annoyingly loud. So enjoy the conversation. Thanks, Deborah.
I'm going to just show your video for a second so people can get a sense of Mafi. It's just like a few minutes long. All right, can everyone see my screen?
We live at times when we know more than ever before. And yet, we are more uncertain than ever about the decisions we make. Decision-making has gotten hard. So, We want to make your decision to choose Moffy an easy one. Our approach involves transparency and authenticity, facts instead of empty phrases, imparting knowledge, and no greenwashing. Moffy blends durability, a natural look and feel, and health aspects in all our products. For us, sustainability means quality of life and longevity means safety. At least one new tree is planted for every tree that we source from ecological forests in Europe. We use the entire tree and create designs based on nature. Diversity is an important part of preserving our forests. Apart from oak, we rely on 8 other local wood species. The longevity of our products comes from 2 important aspects: the structure of the floorboards and the choice of finish. The symmetry of our materials ensures they meet our robust quality standards. For the finish, we rely on oiled and, more importantly, air-dried surfaces. And this approach makes a huge difference. People live and work directly on the wooden floor, which is always warm to the touch and can be repaired at any time. Small signs of wear disappear by themselves. The indoor climate is constantly improved. Maintenance is simple. Just clean the floor with warm water and our wood floor soap. Waste management and the end of the product life cycle are also part of the story. This means that all chippings are collected during the production stage and then processed into pellets. For every square meter of our natural wood floors, the sum of all these efforts, 8 kilograms of CO2, is actively extracted from the environment. And should our flooring no longer be needed after many years, it is completely compostable and thus returns to nature. Moffy, your right decision.
Okay, so now we're all gonna go out and purchase
No
coffee right
offense,
away.
but if you still think stocks,
Oh,
real estate,
it's
or
still
crypto are
going.
the best
Sorry,
passive
just a
income
second.
investment, then
I was like, who said no offense? That's rude. Okay, all right, so now I'm gonna get into the rest of the presentation, and if we have questions, if things come up during this conversation, put your chats in the chat box. I'm probably just gonna run through it because I'm not sure if I'll get through all of it in time, but I wanna leave time at the end for a little bit of discussion, and then if you have questions, especially for Walter, we can kind of address all of that then. Okay, so sorry, a second. Okay, so this is an AIA accredited program. For those of you getting credits, you'll be if you've signed up that way, you will be getting credits. So just digging right in, we're calling this Healthy Homes, 8 key metrics to designing homes with a focus on health and sustainability. And I know at least one of you on this call that I noticed will be very familiar with the picture on this that I'm showing here. Okay, so who am I and why am I here talking to you to begin with? My name is Deborah. Below, I run an architecture practice called Cedar. We're located in Alexandria. We work all around the region. I'm a Maryland, I live in Maryland, so I'm a PV member. Cedar, what we do at Cedar is primarily residential. We're an architecture and interior design practice, and we're very dedicated to creating custom and environmentally sensitive homes. We think that environmentally sensitive includes health as its right. So I'm going to start from this kind of phenomenological perspective, like tugging on your heartstrings, let's really zoom out. What is the world that we want to live in? And, just giving ourselves a minute to look at this incredibly beautiful, marble that we spend all of our time on from this bigger perspective. It's amazing. It's an amazing place to live. And then we zoom way in and we see things like this happen. So I've been I have been focused on sustainability through sort of the majority of my career, but last February, I think it was when this happened, this train wreck in East Palestine, Ohio, that just really tugged me in a very bad way. And I started to dig into it and learn a little bit more and just began to look at, my gosh, the environmental impact, but wait a minute, hold on. Look at the stuff that this train was carrying, right? And it's still having so much impact today for those local residents, but it has impact for all of us. The stuff that this train wreck, I think you probably all remember this, was carrying were primarily these 4 chemicals that I've listed over here, these very toxic chemicals. These chemicals, the reason that these chemicals exist is to create, in large part, building products. The number 1 chemical on the train was vinyl chloride. That's the number 1 thing that spilled. Vinyl chloride is the main component in PVC. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. Okay, now I'm going to zoom back a number of years, going to Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm still bringing it home. This is like a little autobiographical for me because I was born in Cleveland. I didn't grow up there, but I was born there. And I was born there only a few years after the Cuyahoga River running through Cleveland spontaneously lit on fire. Spontaneously lit on fire. That wasn't the first time it happened. You're probably all familiar with this. This disaster, this environmental disaster, is one of the primary reasons the EPA was founded. It was founded the following year. Also, the first Earth Day was celebrated in the States following this particular disaster. This Cuyahoga River disaster is not that far from that East Palestine disaster, by the way. Now, just moving eastward a little bit, and 40 years later, this this chemical spill in the Delaware River, sorry, in a tributary to the Delaware River, happens about a month after the East Palestine disaster. And there were a lot of comparisons being made between the 2 of those things, because if you see down here, some of these ingredients are key components and key parts of the ingredients that were also spilled in that train wreck. So why am I focusing so much on this? Because these are our building materials and we need to be paying attention. We need to be aware of what's going into our buildings, and we need to be informed so we can make better choices. This Delaware River spill, it was a tributary to it in Otter Creek. It ended up not being that big of a deal, or so they say. But just kind of keeping in mind, the Delaware River Basin supplies drinking water to more than 17 million people. So it could really have a major health impact if we continue to kind of look at it. That's one isolated incident. So thinking through those factors from a lens of health, not just the environmental component, health is impacted by, as this graphic shows you from the Missouri Foundation for Health, what determines our human health is these components shown over here, one of the key components being housing. And housing, the way that I think of it, is not just the places where we sleep at night, but it's also the spaces that we spend the majority of our time. So I think this is an issue not just for our homes, but also for our larger but also for the larger buildings that we live in. So getting ourselves sort of grounded in this context, there are a lot of people talking about health and architecture, and there's really smart people talking about it. And I am only learning from them, and I'm kind of pulling from the resources that I find. But I think they're worthwhile spreading the information. So one of the kind of greatest resources that has really come to light is this one called the 9 Foundations of a Healthy Building. This is being researched at the Harvard's School for Public Health. And they're looking at these different components into what goes in, what are the 9 foundations that go into making a healthy building. So that's at the kind of building scale, but they're also starting to break it apart and look at the home kind of in specifically, because as Joe Allen, who's one of the lead heads, and if anyone is going to the AIA conference, there's a good chance that he'll be speaking there. He says the home influences all factors of health, right? Heart health, brain health, hormonal health, mental health, and we need to be aware of that impact, right? We all know that what we eat matters. We all know that sleeping matters, that exercise matters. But do you know that the components that make up your home, the physical and non-physical components that make up your home, also are really playing a direct impact into your health. So not just them, many other organizations are looking at this. Most people on this call are aware of the Well Building Institute. I took the Well exam several years ago. And then after I took it, I thought, well, I'm not really sure how this is going to be applicable because I'm primarily a single family residential architect. You can't get a certification for single family residential in Well. There is a disclaimer on that in that they have a pilot program out right now to look at single family, which is great. But I think that's going to be a little bit more developer driven than it is single family homeowners. So what are, and then these are some other places, there's a lot of them there's a lot of places that are really paying attention to health, but what are the major difficulties here for a practice like mine? And I think many of yours as well is number one, manpower or woman power, resources, right? Who has the time to devote to certification programs for their projects? Number two, kind of the marketing aspect, who really who cares if they get a certification on their house? And then three, the cost impact, right? Certifications are expensive, but people still want to live in healthy homes, and I want to deliver healthy homes. So what are the ways that we're going to so I guess as a result, like we've come up with our own set of metrics that helps to determine, we think, what is going to be delivering a healthy home. So our starting point is with nature. And I start there because nature is one of my first loves, and it will be my constant love. And I use it, I've always brought it into architecture. And I've always thought it's got to be more than that. It's not just, it's not just bridging, it's not just beautiful views and, kind of being surrounded by trees. There's more to it. And as I began to dig deeper and deeper, I saw there really is quite a bit more to it. So, with apologies to Paracelsus, the 16th century medical man, the art of healing comes from nature, not from the architect. Therefore, the architect must start with nature with an open mind. So that's where we begin our design approach. We begin it from the perspective of nature, and nature is broken down into these 8 guiding principles. So we look for ways to minimize energy consumption, to evoke a sense of wellness, incorporate biophilic materials, and create environments that alleviate stress and mitigate negative health impacts. So these eight principles: air, mind, light, sound, thermal, biophilia, material, and water. I'm going to dig through all of those today. So starting with nature again, there have been various approaches to nature-based design over time. And these are kind of the 3 major ones that we can kind of look at. Biophilic design, sort of the all-encompassing. This is experiencing nature. Then there's biomorphic design. This is kind of a formal exploration of nature, right? Then there is biomimetic design, biomimicry. This is more of a sort of functionally inspired design. How can we design in a way that nature operates already? I sort of feel as if biophilic design encompasses all of those. And what that ends up doing is creating a kind of curation of space. And through these kind of different categories. So it's incorporating nature, like kind of direct incorporation. It's being inspired by nature, mimicking patterns, things like that, and interacting, creating settings that feel as if they are natural. And this just kind of to start the mood off, this was an early project that we did in Reston in a commercial building. This was a wellness center. And every element that we brought into here is an entirely unprocessed material, aside from paint, unfortunately, the paint on the walls. And then, all the elements of greenery and trying to bring sunlight and daylight and views through. So just kind of an example of setting that biophilic tone. So the next category that we'll look at is light. So light. Light is such an interesting topic. We think of it really from a visual only perspective, right? But light isn't just for seeing. In fact, we don't actually see light, we receive it. And it's estimated that 2/3 of our cellular activity runs on light through our body's photoreceptor systems. So the great biological importance here of these photoreceptor systems is that they are converting that light into signals that then influence our biological processes. These have direct impacts to our health, and they can do things like increase our moods, improve our alertness, or kind of the vice versa. Like Dr. Shelley James talks about here, where she mentions our twilight indoor lives. When we don't have carefully curated interior light situations, we can have detrimental impacts on our health. So actually where that's going, and as I began looking at that more, the concept here is that we don't actually give ourselves enough light during the day, and we give ourselves too much of it kind of at night. So how are we measuring light? Currently, we're measuring it really from just the visual component. From the WELL standard, it says lighting conditions in most spaces are designed to meet the visual needs of individuals. So again, it's that visual component, but they don't take into account circadian and mental health. These elements, lux, lumens, CRI, and layout, CRI being a little bit of an outlier here, are the things that influence us from the visual components. The major thing that has been missing in lighting so far, and that is really, needs to be catching up, is timing. So timing, I write tunable lighting. That's one really great way of doing it. Timing meaning the right light at the right time of day. The graphic up at the top is just showing also that spectrum of light. So that is what we're talking about with kind of the right light. Sunlight has, this very well-rounded grand spectrum. LED is trying to kind of catch up to it, and fluorescent does a terrible job, and incandescent is really only concerned with kind of the warmer end of the spectrum. Okay, so circadian lighting related to our circadian rhythm. This is how our bodies know what time it is through daylight, really. So you see, this is kind of showing what our circadian clock is doing, what our circadian rhythm is doing, and how the cells in our body are reacting based on this time of day. It knows this time of day in large part because of, in the graphic below, because of the way that the color of the sun and where it's located in the sky throughout the day. So you see it's a very warm color temperature, and I think we're mostly familiar with this in the morning and then in the evening, and then it's a very cool color temperature at noon. But we've got this super high Kelvin temperature at noon, but fluorescent can get up that high, but it's not a very good spectrum, right? So we're still not quite getting the right qualities of light if we're choosing the brighter light, let's say in the middle of the day. So, we're here talking about single family or residential settings, and residential settings, primarily the focus is like early morning and then evening, right? But that's changed, especially with COVID, where people are working from home. So now we actually have to factor in these brighter light moments throughout our day. So here, this graphic is kind of trying to explain how we design light for the right zone. And this man, David Warfel, is a lighting designer who writes this great blog called The Language of Light. I totally recommend it. He also wrote this Fine Home Building article that was published in December of 2023. And that article really breaks it down so well and helps you understand the types of light that need to be incorporated within a space. So let's look at what is natural light doing. Natural light is omnidirectional, right? It's everywhere around us. It doesn't have a single source point. It's a very broad spectrum. It's got all of the colors in it, and it targets those receptors within our bodies kind of exactly how we need them to be targeted. Artificial light, on the other hand, is just a single source point traditionally. It's a limited or a very static spectrum. I don't know about the rest of you, but traditionally we have designed for 2700K CRI or 2700K at like 90 CRI. And that's like what we kind of say universally, but that isn't necessarily helpful. That's helpful for some times of day, but not always. So what are some solutions that we can have in here? So in this graphic, you see, this is showing the rising sun and falling sky, different types of lighting options. And then the blue dashed lines showing you where the glare zone is. One of the biggest mistakes that I think we make is that we put recessed ceiling lights sort of like hovering around our interior space to just create sort of a uniform quality of light, but they end up being directly in our glare zones because they're in the space that we occupy. what David Warfel and others are suggesting is move those off to the perimeters of the room and face them directionally against the wall or against the ceiling so they aren't hitting our glare zone. Another thing to do is, again, like bringing in tunable lights. So tunable lighting is a really growing conversation. In one project that we have right now, we're using a product called Ketra that you may be familiar with. This is a Lutron product. It's really probably the cream of the crop in terms of the direction of lighting right now. It will change color temperature over time, and it has an incredibly broad spectrum. So you really see the kind of real colors in the things that it's shining on. But it's an expensive product. There are others out there that do it not quite as well, but also are moving in this tunable direction. Philips Hue is kind of the homeowner grade of that. Or do full spectrum lighting and have it turning on and off at different times at different Kelvin temperature of light. Smart systems help as well. Lutron Homeworks makes a good one. And that's going to help you say, okay, well, this is my task lighting zone and I'm going to be here during the day. Primarily this is where the work zone is. Have that smart system always have on the kind of brighter color temperature lights at certain times of day, and then turning off or changing the color temperature for you so you don't have to think about it. And it automatically is working with your circadian rhythm. As I've already mentioned, keeping lights out of glare zone and making lights adjustable. I think that's a huge one. Make them adjustable so that if they do end up in a glare zone, you can move them out of the way. So I would be remiss to not mention that the best source of light and the one that we opt for automatically from the beginning is daylight. If we can bring daylight into our spaces, do it. Let's bring it in. You don't want to do it at the expense of other things, right? Like privacy, it needs to be thoughtful. But if you can do it, like in this instance, we covered the entire walls with windows, and now it's not just bringing in daylight, but it's also bringing in views. And because this house was situated kind of low in the ground and it's really being caressed and held by the landscape around it, it's bringing in an aesthetic quality as well. This is during the day, no lights are needed. The lights that we have on there are mostly just for aesthetic or for evening, kind of evening use. Okay, moving on and looking at air quality. So a few years ago, we all know the air quality problem was viral. Now, after last summer, the air quality problem has become fine particulate matter. We have many of us become familiar with the term particulate matter, right? And how like these incredibly fine particles find their ways into our breathing networks. Wildfires, right? It's crazy that we're thinking on the East Coast about wildfires. So now studies are being done about this. And that is, this is a West Coast thing that has kind of promoted a lot of these studies, but the most insidious parts of wildfire smoke can still get into your home. So the first recommendation is if there is a wildfire or if there's bad air quality at all, go inside. That's the first recommendation. But what they're learning is actually going inside isn't helping that much. So what are some of the keys to good indoor air quality? Number one, air tightness, keeping outdoor air out and keeping inside air in, and making sure you have a constant exchange that is filtered so you don't have stagnant air. Moisture control is a huge one. We'll look at that in a little more detail. Source control. If you are bringing things into your house, make sure that they aren't contributing to poor indoor air quality. So that is furniture, it's carpets, it's wallpaper, it's painting, it's sealants, right? Making sure that you're bringing things in that are helping your air quality. Filtration, that's a huge one that you probably need some professional help with if you have to do it in your own house. It's really recommended that you use good filters like MERV 13 or higher or HEPA filters, but making sure that they're sized accurately for your space, making sure that they're located on your duct, not on the unit, so you don't get particles through the ductwork, and making sure that they're replaced regularly. If you're going to begin to get into things like air tightness, you need to bring in ventilation. So here's where we recommend doing ERVs or HRVs, depending on your climate and your system, making sure that you have proper flow of air, and then pressure balancing. There's the Allison Bales in a House Needs to Breathe or Does It really breaks this down excellently. I totally recommend that book if you want to know more about this topic. What are some of the things that we're bringing into our houses that are contributing to poor indoor air quality? Number one thing that is being talked about, I think now more and more, is combustion appliances. It's our gas stoves. I'm sorry for all of us, but I think it's time for gas stoves to move on and for us to move into the future. Induction is amazing. Electric also has its place, but these things are bringing in not just carbon monoxide, which we all know is dangerous, but this fine particulate matter. Radon is another major contributing factor. We live in an area where radon isn't kind of typically a major concern, but you always need to check it. And it's not a bad idea even if you have kind of a low radon, if you're in a low radon zone, it's not a bad idea to implement a passive radon system just in case. Not cleaning your filters or not having the correct filters, that's contributing to poor indoor air quality. Not having correct exhaust. Again, things that create VOCs in your house. And then mold and mildew, that's relative humidity, pest, dust, and lead. Lead is not just not just chipping paint problem, but lead dust, as it becomes dust, then filters into your air. So there are things that we can do to mitigate all of these things, as I've kind of laid out over on the right side. Using natural materials, adding ERVs, cleaning filters, etc. Okay, so kind of digging in a little bit deeper to the humidity and making sure that your air is dry, but not too dry, as this chart shows you. This chart is known as the Stirling chart for those who aren't familiar with it. The Stirling chart was, it's named after one of the paper's authors. This paper that looked at the direct effect of relative humidity on indoor environments. And what they found is just so interesting, that there is an optimum zone for relative humidity between 30 and 60%, and that's based on winter versus summer. And when we're outside of that optimum zone, that's prime breeding grounds for these different categories of problems that are health problems, right? So bacteria actually thrive in both dry and humid environments. So do viruses, and so do allergies and asthma. But fungi and mites and chemical interactions, VOC problems, those thrive in really humid environments. So well, I won't go too deep into that. And then ozone production thrives in very dry environments. So there's this chart is really beginning to explain why it is actually really important for us to keep our humidity low. It's not just about mold, right? Which it is about mold, but it's about so much more than that. So what are some of the major causes of excess humidity? A lot of it we know, but let's just pay attention to it. Humid outdoor environment, if you're not managing your indoor environment and it's coming in, that's a major cause. So air leakage. Poor ventilation, or just really doing a lot of things indoors that cause excess dampness that isn't then ventilated outside, cooking, showers, tubs. And then another massive one is poor exterior drainage. Look around the perimeter of the house. Make sure that your site is sloping away from the house. Make sure that your gutters aren't slowly dripping right in the corners of your houses, right? Make sure that it is not getting into your foundation. If your basement smells damp or feels damp, then it's a good chance that you have a problem there. How do you know though, right? So you can go and test the air with a hygrometer and see what the relative humidity actually is. You may be able to tell without that, but if you're not sure. And some things you can do are really obvious. Turn on your exhaust fans. Make sure your filters are working. Again, sealing your exterior envelope and sloping away from the house, fixing any roof drainage issues. Pay attention to some of the obvious stuff is going to prevent you from having really bad issues later. Okay, so moving on to materials. This is one of my favorite topics. Walter's already kind of dove into this, whatever is the right word, into this for us. But materials is such a big one, and it's a hard one, I think, for smaller practices to really navigate, because materials are pretty non-transparent as far as we can tell what's actually going into them. So studies have been done on this, and like here, this University of Michigan study found 55 chemicals of concern found in different in the different building elements throughout homes across the United States. Some of them have concentrations, negative concentrations of these chemicals that are up to 1,000 times higher than recommended. Okay, and that's not just immediately after moving into a new house, that's continuing. And, relative humidity could be impacting that. So I want to so looking at materials and looking at some of that chemical composition, I want to go back to that train crash and then the water problems and talk a little bit more about the problem with these chemicals. Vinyl chloride, the biggest element that was released in the East Palestine train disaster, creates PVC. I think it's time for us to really reevaluate the use of PVC. The problem is it's in so much. And then PVC, it's not just the vinyl chloride, it's not just the rigid PVC, but it's the chemical components that go into making PVC, and then many, many other things, which are then those forever chemicals, the PFAS. There's over 10,000 of them. Right now, the EPA is looking at only 2 of them as a problem. There's over 10,000 of them, and we're not even sure, right, what the kind of larger thing is here. PFAS, the problem with PFAS is that their molecular structure, their chemical bond is so much stronger than anything found in nature that they do not break down in nature. Nature cannot balance that system. And they're beginning to discover that they're found in basically everybody's bodies. They're found in all of these building products, you'll find PFAS, and many of them are made of PVC. And then microplastics, I'm not going to dive into, but they are also finding microplastics in like 90% of the population. And that's disrupting our endocrine system. That's disrupting so many different components. So how do they get, this graphic over here, the problem with PFAS shows you how they get into our bodies. There's so many different ways. Here they list cooking with nonstick pans. Has anyone seen the movie Dark Waters? Dark Waters, right? Dark Waters. Has anyone seen that movie? You should definitely go and watch this.
Yeah, Dark Water.
Dark
Incredible,
Water.
scary. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. And it's the original PFAS was what made Teflon. And that movie is all about Teflon and DuPont. So go check it out. It's a nail biter. So we need to be investigating the elements that we're putting into our buildings and, giving our children the toys, right? And the things that we're just handing them to put into their mouths. These are things that are causing problems for their own health as well. So those are big chemical problems that are really persistent, that are totally persistent, and that are really, really prevalent. Here's another one that I saw a conversation going around through the small firm exchange group about excuse me, silicosis, the fact that the stones that we like so much to use for our countertops, these artificial stones, it's causing a lot of news right now because it's creating problems for the people who are fabricating them, and it's contributing to a rise in silicosis. Silicosis is a disease or a problem of the lungs primarily that has been around for millennia, but it's becoming a kind of bigger issue because it's not just the silicone part of it, or the silica part of it, the high concentration of silica. Silica dust getting into your system is very hard on your system, but it's also then the combination of the harmful polymer resins and dyes that's added to it that then get into your system as well. And this is causing what they're thinking of as an emerging health crisis. But it's a health crisis for factory workers, right? It's not a health crisis for homeowners. But why doesn't that matter as well? Why would we be specifying products that is a health crisis for anybody? And then I would be remiss to not talk about design for freedom. If you haven't heard about this, please check it out online. And if you're going to the AIA conference, I'm sure that they will also be speaking there. This is looking at modern slavery in our material industry. So it's actually way more prevalent than any of us give it credit for. And although there are global laws about this, and the United States has very strict laws about this, it's still very prevalent because the process is not a transparent one, and we can't see where everything is coming from in our material process. And we don't have the bandwidth or the wherewithal to be able to really follow it along its lines. So this group, Design for Freedom, is doing an amazing job of trying to educate and learn more about what the actual problem is. This graphic here shows you that as it goes up from the blue up to the light gray, the problem of modern slavery become what they're calling modern slavery, which could mean a lot of different things, forced labor. That it gets worse as you get up into the more into the materials that have more fabrication related to them, that are less raw. So if you go see their presentation, as they say, once you know, you can't unknow that, and we have to factor it in as we make our decisions. So what are some of the things we can do? We design with materials that don't contain harmful ingredients. We design with materials that don't harm people, that don't use child labor. We design with materials that are fabricated locally, but how do we know? How do we actually know, right? And who's got the resources to be able to investigate every single material that we're putting into our buildings? Well, one of the things that we're doing at Cedar is to start with materials that are already in as raw of a state as possible. And that kind of eliminates some of the issue there. So these are some materials that we love very much. Lime-based paints, we're putting this in more and more houses. Zinc is such an incredible material because although it is a pricier material, it is self-healing and it will last indefinitely. Untreated cedar, we put this on many projects, and we had one project that 5 years in, it was living in its kind of teenage phases and looking a little ratty, but they went and just pressure washed it, and it's brand new. It looks terrific all over again. But it also, if they hadn't done that, in another couple of years, it would have evened out and looked really beautiful in its gray patinaed state. Soapstone is another excellent material, right? It does etch, it is soft, and it will scratch, but you can sand it out and then refinish it, and it will look good as new. Rammed earth is a new one for us. Just watch, we will have a rammed earth project. It's one of my goals. It's not unheard of in this area. It's almost not unheard of in this area. It's mostly not heard of, but we're going to make it heard of. It's possible to do here. Okay, so really the things that we can do, especially if we don't have large resources to devote to looking at materials. If you're not familiar already with the AIA Materials Pledge, you can be a signatory on that. Cedar is a signatory. But again, we don't have the resources to really get all of that documentation in place. So we're still trying to do, the best that we can and make sure that we're using materials. You can refer to, there is more than this, but this is a list that I really like. The Mindful Materials database is growing and growing, and they're, linked with the Materials Pledge. So that's a great database. The Red List Free is just a great database to look at for what you shouldn't be using rather than what maybe as much what you should. Healthy Materials Lab, they do presentations or learning seminars, so you can check them out at Parsons in New York. They're doing awesome things. And then this one that I'm showing over here is Habitable. This is formerly the Healthy Building Network, so if you had heard of it that way before. So this database is an awesome starting point because you go in and say, I want to put in insulation. And here what they're showing you is spray polyurethane foam insulation is one of the worst offenders. Blown in wood fiber is one of the best. So you could go anywhere in between here. What they're saying is just start small. Even if you're not going to do blown in wood fiber because it's too expensive or your builder doesn't know how to use it, go up to XPS, go up to polyiso. Just try to step up a little bit away from what we know is a problematic material. And then Design for Freedom, this is going to look at the, how am I doing on time? Oh, I better move faster. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit more quickly through the rest of this. Okay, so fresh water. Fresh water is thought of by some as just as pressing of an issue as the carbon impact on climate change. We've seen an 84% decline in freshwater biodiversity since 1970. Check out this website. I'll put these links in the chat when we're done. Check out this website for just an interactive dialogue about what our groundwater is looking like. It's really an incredible expose. So what are the things we need to do with water? Number one, we need our homes to stay dry. That's the building science comportion. I'm not going to dig into that because we talk about that a lot and there are lots of resources for that, making sure that you're keeping water out, and there's different ways that you do that. And then there's the healthy component of water, making sure your water quality is good and making sure that we're not using too much of it. So quantity, we use a lot of water as humans. We use a lot of water. What can we do? I mean, honestly, residential settings, we're not the worst offenders of water use, but we could still do our part. The biggest thing really is the toilet. The toilet is the biggest offender. Let's just start doing low flow fixtures. Look for water sense models because they've tested those to make sure that they're still functioning as well as non-low flow fixtures. Another thing is this, I put this plug in here for this product because, oh, smart plug. I put it in for this product because, a lot of times people like to have hot water recirculation, but that can be really wasteful of electricity. This does hot water recirculation, but does it in a very efficient electric way. So that's good, number one. So you're not running a ton of water while you're waiting for hot water, but then also to kind of save on the electric part of it. Leaks actually contribute to a huge amount of water flow issues globally, which is, or around the country, which is really interesting. So we could put in things that detect leaks into our specs. And then rain sensor, if you're doing a project with irrigation, have a rain sensor included so that you don't need to turn on your irrigation if it's going to be raining. The quality. Okay, so quickly, the problem here is that, yeah, we have our water that we're drinking tested, right? But the water that's tested is tested at the facility. The facility might be miles away from your tap, right? So it's coming through lines that could be corroding. It could be interacting with the water that's running through it. You don't know the quality of water that you're getting in your home. You need to get it tested. They recommend testing annually. You might test even more than that if you're concerned about it. So that's where it's water companies are required to test. Well water is not tested. That's on you entirely. And bottled water is totally unregulated. So I don't even know why we're drinking bottled water. We have no idea what we're drinking. So the goal here is to get your water tested. One thing that we're starting to implement in our practice is that when we start a new project, we want to test the water for people so we can help them determine what kind of filtration that they should be putting on at their houses if they need it or not. You can go to National Testing Laboratories, watercheck.com, or you can get it tested for free. This is a little expensive. You can get it tested for free from your local municipality. And these, I'm listing out here some of the things to look for when you test your water. And I think we always should be using filtered water. We never know. The problem, you know, we all remember Flint, right? In 2014, Flint changed their municipal source of water. And the problem was that because they changed it and the water had a different chemical composition, it began to corrode the pipes. And that was where the lead started to leach from. And that's what caused all of those water factors. Oh, this is a really good starting point. So EWG is a good starting point for a lot of things. The Environmental Working Group, they're here in DC. You can go on there and look at their tap water database and just type in your zip code and it's going to tell you, hey, look, in Alexandria, we see that there are 13 chemicals or contaminants in your drinking water that you should be aware of, that we think are going too high. And their point is, you know, even if it's legal, it doesn't mean that it's safe, especially if you have any kind of sensitivities. You need to check these things. Okay, so thermal quality. Thermal, I'm lumping energy efficiency and comfort into this topic together. Energy efficiency might deserve its own headline, and I've been pretty vocal about the benefits of passive house over time. Our planet needs it. It provides major benefits, but there's other factors related that impact human health. The link between inadequate heating, damp, cold, and moldy houses and poor health has been highlighted and is well known. So we need to be paying attention also to comfort. This is a study that showed looking at thermal comfort of primary school children. This isn't local, but I think it's really interesting. Looking at the things that impact their thermal comfort, then went out and impacted in this blue circle around here, all of these aspects of their day-to-day experience. So their mental health, physical health, their thermal comfort had an influence on all of those things. So we want to pay attention to comfort. It's not just about comfort. So starting here, we're looking at passive house, right? Passive house is the gold standard. If you do design a passive house building, you're going to be getting in the thermal comfort. It's like a freebie. Passive house means it means many things, but very peripherally, it means these big things: fresh air recovery, continuous air barrier, insulation, thermal bridging, and high performance windows and doors. That's where Gary comes in down there. You can talk to him about it. These are the components of passive house. Passive house doesn't necessarily have to be more expensive, but it can be. And so that's why I think many people are probably pretty familiar with this by now, the Pretty Good House standard. If not, this book is also excellent. There's also an online course you can take to learn about Pretty Good House. It approaches the design of a house that is very energy efficient, but from an economical point of view, so that it can be available to anybody. And they look at all of these different topics and sort of break the house down into those topics to make sure that you're approaching it correctly. This is an excellent metric to be able to make sure you are designing a thermally comfortable home and also a thermally efficient home. Okay, looking at sound. Sound, I also just really love this topic. I love this topic because as this quote here says, sound is invisible and we're not sure, we don't even recognize that we're perceiving it, but it is a hugely important aspect of the buildings that we create. Buildings define sound and are defined by sound, right? And we know that in larger buildings, but we don't think about it as much in our houses. I have a client who had problems hearing even in her own house, and that was what started us to really begin looking at it. This professor of neuroscience has been investigating sound in the built environment for a while, and she sort of speculates that hearing around, when you're surrounded by a lot of noise, trying to isolate what you're trying to hear is an incredibly difficult job for the brain. It takes a lot of brain power. So it's something we should be paying attention to in architecture. So this is, I think, a little bit more of a perception thing, within this context, but just to kind of plug back into passive house for a second, if you are designing passive house or even Pretty Good House, you're receiving so many benefits that are also then contributing to this aspect of your architecture in a reduction in sound. So there's been studies here, and this architect kind of diagrams it pretty nicely, that a conventional building, can have a pretty high level of sound. And a passive house design standard will bring it down by 50%. So that's a pretty great thing. We don't want to totally eliminate reverberation, right? There's something beautiful about the quality of reverberation. It's necessary, but we do want to be able to control it, and we want to control how we receive it. So some of the questions that we're asking in our practice are, what is the quality of sound that we're trying to achieve? How does the space that we're designing affect it? How do the materials that we're putting into the space affect it? I have read studies of people who have high sensitivities, high kind of environmental sensitivities, that do not like bathing because they go into a bathroom and the sounds are just assaulting them, and so they'll leave the bathroom. There are so many hard surfaces, right? There's nothing to absorb that sound to make it easier on them. What about environmental aspects? And then how about other elements that you're bringing in? Are you paying attention to where the HVAC equipment is located? Is it near an office or a bedroom? Is it noisy? How about your dishwasher? How about your washing machine? These are things that all contribute to your sound quality. Where the TV is located relative to where you have quiet spaces, really paying attention to those aspects. And then I'm just going to kind of finish off with this concept of mind. So in our office, we are always talking about how the homes that we design serve the people that we're designing them for. What are we doing to make sure that the homes are serving them? How are we designing sanctuaries for them? Sanctuary meaning, how are we designing places of protection? How are we designing this refuge, a place that people can decompress, live in, and really be happy and healthy in? And this is kind of not, it's a funny graphic, but it's not actually uncommon, even in you know, in kind of everyday life, you begin to just layer yourself into your space and stop paying attention to what it is. And now that we're working from home, right, you really are accepting this level of this kind of degree of space that you weren't accepting before. How are we paying attention to that, and how are we designing for it so that doesn't happen? You want your space to uplift you, not to break you down. As I started really looking into this, I began to see how incredibly beautiful trauma-informed design is. Now, this is a topic that's talked about in much different settings than residential, but I think it has a lot to teach us in a residential setting. These are some of the principles over here of trauma-informed design that we can be designing to. And as I look at what these principles are, I realize that they fit really nicely into the categories that we're already incorporating into our design framework. So connection to nature, right? Views, visual, all of these things, lighting, color psychology is a huge one, paying attention to what color we're really bringing in. Autonomy and control in a residential setting is maybe a little bit less, I wouldn't say important, but it's kind of more embedded into the architecture in that case. Minimizing clutter is actually one of our we feel like we've really achieved something if we help people learn, if we help people really decide where things go, and then that's how it's used. It feels like a huge triumph. Security and safety, that's a huge aspect to the mental component of space. So I showed you that image in the beginning where it's surrounded by windows. It felt safe, even though it was really wide open to its exterior. You don't want to design just like a wide open space that doesn't, you know, that doesn't make the person inside feel safe. Connection to other humans, sound again, and comfort. These things all kind of come into it. And one of the ways that we start going about this aspect of design is through a pre-designed questionnaire. And we ask questions like this to see, number one, how does a person who's living there want to experience their space? And what's going to really kind of deliver for them that optimal product? I'm going to leave it there because we're just about at the end. And then I want to give you guys a few minutes for questions. I'm just plugging a few images here. This wonderful student here is actually my son. He was a model for this project. This is a Waldorf school that we designed. What we're designing basically is kind of background space that then the school could fill in with their own, but they really figured out color psychology in their program. This is that same Waldorf school. And although they needed the visibility, they also needed the privacy for kids to come and have a moment separate. And you see that although there's not great views outside, they brought the nature in through their own kind of artwork. And then, you know, one of our favorite things is just like layer on, if it's got a great view and it's got good sun exposure and it's not in a bad place, just layer it in there and bring that light in and bring that view in. This automatically helps people to de-stress. Okay, I'm leaving it there and we'll, I think, stop sharing.
Great job, Deborah. Holy cow, I want you to be my architect.
You want me to be what?
Can you be my architect?
Yes, I can. Let's do it.
You know how to design and build a human health centered space. So I wanted to say that I helped out by adding a bunch of links in the chats. Please check them out. I also wanted Gary to plug in the Passive House one if he's on still. And that's a fantastic group, really vibrant community here in DC. And Bo has a meeting every month. That was really fun. You guys do that every month? Passive House DC. But anyway,
yeah.
So much information. You need 2 hours at least. More than an hour.
It's a lot to try to cover at once. But well, here we are. Yeah, we have a minute or two if anybody has any questions.
I do have one thing to say, that all of the things that you mentioned where there are potential issues, Mafi has a solution for every one of them.
Everyone.
So everyone, yes. Sound. You talked about the bathroom being echoey. Put a wood floor in the bathroom. It's okay to get it wet.
There you go.
Filtering the air, balancing humidity, taking care of the air filtration. Feels good at the textile. It's a direct connection to nature. Plug, plug, plug. Here I go. So, my Mafi floors.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you, Mafi, for all you do.
Of course, thank you. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat, so. I think if anyone, can you get these chat links if it's a recording?
Yeah. Is it recording, Sue?
Should still be.
It is recording, and so yes, we can capture the links.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we can wrap up here. Thanks everyone for showing up.
Thank you. Great job.
Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.